Welcome back to Dysregulated. Yet again, we are in for a special one today. On our season 1 finale of Dysregulated, we have had a blast. I'm super excited. This is kind of concluding our, I'll call it intro season of, hey, this is neurofeedback, neuromodulation. Here's what we do. We got a lot to talk about today. We are covering everything from PTSD to bipolar to autism to all of these different things that a lot of times people throw out the term misdiagnosis. Or have we missed the diagnosis? Yeah, so to start us off, I think the main thing we're going to cover today is a group of 3 different ways that we commonly see quote-unquote misdiagnosis. However, we're going to use that term, we're using that term not quite as people think of it. I don't know, Jeff or Vince, do you guys want to go into a little bit of what we mean by misdiagnosis?
Yeah, I mean, when you hear us start an episode by saying that that's what we're going to be focusing on, I feel like any other clinician or mental health professional out there is going to be like, oh well, here we go. They're going to tell us how we're doing it wrong, and that's definitely not what we're trying to do here. Yeah, we're coming at it with humility, but we also are just, looking at the process as it exists. It's almost like this is a process that those of you that work in the field, you share this process with us. We like to be innovative. We want to think of how things can be better, right? If things are going well, we'll keep doing them, but we want to think of how things can be going a little bit better for our clients, right? And in the nature of the work that we do. So that's why we're trying to look at diagnosis as a process and also bring that neurofeedback QEEG lens to it.
Is it misdiagnosis or is it clarifying diagnosis?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to think of it. And we've said this all along, right? One of the beauties of neurofeedback is it brings an entirely different frame of reference by which to evaluate the problems that we all struggle with. Going back to kind of like some of our, maybe, I don't know, some of our Queegish thinking and silly illustrations. Keep in mind how important your frame of reference actually is. I'm going to date myself on this one, going way back. I actually am of the generation that would like literally listen to a radio station. We didn't have cool things like podcasts, right? But one of the things you do is you listen to them. It wasn't uncommon for DJs to run what they would call these phone scams. I don't know if you guys have podcasts that do that anymore, but the idea was that, yeah, kind of like that.
Jerky Boys from the 90s.
Okay. But they would have one of their listeners call them up and say, hey, I want a phone scam. For instance, a college age girl wants to phone scam her dad. And so they set this whole thing up. The DJ calls up the dad and basically starts trash talking the girl to the dad, maybe saying things like, oh, she's such a kind of a thing. And the dad's like, who are you? What are you talking about? The dad's starting to get inflamed with rage, and the DJ just keeps working him up. Yep. Right. And the guy, like the dad, like a good dad, is going to defend his daughter's image, and he's like yelling and screaming, like almost to the point where he's going to have a heart attack, and he's threatening, I'm going to come over there, I'm going to beat you up, I'm going to these guys like literally going crazy. And then when it's about to get really out of hand, the DJ goes, oh wait, by the way, this is Billy Bob Bill, and I'm with WNEW 95.7 radio, and you've just been phone scammed. And then the dad goes, Billy Bob Bill, I love you. Oh, I listen to you all the time. And you go, 10 seconds ago, he's ready to show up and kill the dude. 10 seconds later, they're best friends. What happened? The frame changed. Our frame of reference will always determine our course of action, our attitude. And so this is where I go when I think of the idea of misdiagnosis. And again, I say this with humility. We need to reconceptualize symptoms that are being presented, not with the goal of giving a diagnostic category. We need to be doing it with a sense of, I want to understand it. Where's it coming from? Why is it there? Because there are so many different symptoms that we confuse with each other that maybe are related, aren't related, maybe come up with the right checklist. And then we describe them as something. And and then we we try to treat it. I think you were talking more, right?
I almost like what I'm literally sitting here and for the first time having like an image show up in my mind, right? You guys go to the eye doctor, right? Like you have any eye prescriptions or anything like that, they'll have you sit and put your chin on the thing and you've got the giant binoculars and they're putting different lenses in front of it, right? And they're trying to see where your vision focuses, right? So imagine yourself sitting in a situation like that and you have all of these different lenses. These lenses, let's call them diagnoses, right? So now you got a person that you're working with here and you say, stand over there real quick. And if we've already given them a label, that label, well, part of the purpose should be that it is the lens through which, at least to some degree, obviously mixed with their experiences and their uniqueness and personal accounts, but that is the lens through which we are going to view our action towards that person. How are we going to treat things, right? A lot of times we want the label to actually help guide, inform, and accurately, pretty much move our treatment to a place of helping them. So if we're popping different lenses in front, but we don't have the right lens, it is going to affect, one, how we see them, two, how we interact with them, and three, what they get out of it.
Yeah. And a lot of times those lenses, even the lenses end up being distorted. And, as much as I can look at the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, right? That's kind of our diagnosing Bible for anybody that's licensed in mental health. As much as that has contributed much to the field, helped us to understand, sought to categorize and conceptualize, it's now become an extremely limiting variable that's really what we're looking at today, is we're looking at limitations that have essentially been imposed on us, preventing us from seeing the issues clearly. And when we don't see them clearly, we can't treat them effectively. So with the neurofeedback lens, we're going to recalibrate, we're going to reconceptualize, we're going to use some other big language that helps us to think different.
Well, if you look at the DSM-5, and I spend a lot of time in it, I'm a therapist, right? I'm going to continue to spend a lot of time in it, but it doesn't really account for the stuff that we're looking at with a QEEG. So when we're dealing with neurofeedback, and the QEEG is our lens through which to see our path to positive impact, we kind of do have to reconsider diagnosis, at least in the work that we do, right? And so I feel like this information is very helpful for someone just in consideration of their caseload, right? In reconceptualizing anything that might be, not as certain in the work that you do with a person.
Yeah.
And like you were saying with the eye doctor, if they don't have the correct lens as they're flipping through, it's not on the eye doctor necessarily. Like, it's
some
not
of it's the equipment.
Doctor's fault. Yeah. It's the equipment not having the appropriate means.
The resources.
Maybe the person who made that equipment didn't know about that person's eyes and why they are the way that they are. Like, there's no, I guess the point in what I'm saying is there's no blame. Like, we're not trying to pass blame.
Right.
We're trying to come to this humbly and say, we see a lot of these, we're going to talk about three important things. And we see them all the time. Very common in people that we talk to, that just, we think the frame of reference needs to be tweaked a little bit to get that clear 20/20 vision. You know? So why don't we start at the top then?
Start at the top. Yeah, one of the things that has always been a problem, and the field understands as being a problem, is the diagnosis of ADHD. And we've said in past episodes, there's at least 15 different biomarkers associated with ADHD. If you take any 2, 3, 4 of them, mix them up in any combination, you'll get the identical diagnosis. So it might have completely different biomarkers coming from completely different parts of the brain that present with very similar, they need to be treated differently. That's a beautiful, right? That's the outcome and significance to the point that if they're different, even though they're the same symptoms, you need to treat them differently. Our diagnostic categories need to be accurate. So diagnosing somebody with ADHD is a big problem. One of the things that we see on a regular basis is, frankly, kids are diagnosed. We get a lot of these kids diagnosed with ADHD and they frankly don't have it. And you're going to say, what do you mean they don't have? Well, okay, they hit the diagnostic criteria for ADHD, but if you were to look at an EEG, the data tells you that they should be diagnosed with something that really doesn't exist in the diagnostic manual. The real diagnosis is hyperarousal of the central nervous system, i.e., more likely to be trauma.
Mhm.
Anyway.
I was going to say, yeah. Hey, you listened to last week's episode.
Mm-hmm.
Sounds familiar. Hyper-aroused central nervous system. I mean, think about it, right? What are some of those presentations of those, right? Like, give me a couple presentations.
So, I mean, how am I going to care enough to pay attention to what's going on in math class when my parietal system is overactivated, and I actually am perceiving threats? Right? Like my central nervous system is teetering right below fight or flight because it's learned that that's the safest place to be because I might have to boogie really, really quickly. So the math teacher and everything that's going to be on that test tomorrow is kind of taking a back seat.
Yeah.
But passing as the kid
ADHD.
can't focus.
Yes. So this is typically, think about it this way. If you're over aroused, on edge, hyperactivated, you're going to have a child who cannot sit in a seat, who is highly distractible. Why? They can't sit still because their central nervous system says, I need to run away. There's a polar bear trying to break into the room, and you're telling me to sit down and take notes for math, but my brain says, I'm about to get mauled. And so now you're ready to break and run. You're sitting around and your senses are hyper attuned. So you heard everything. You hear that. You're like, what's going on? What's going on? You're looking everywhere. So it looks like distractibility type ADHD combined with hyperactivity and likely impulse control problems, because when you try to lock down on that kid, you're going to trigger the fight response and the kid will get in your face and yell and scream at you and lose his mind, get emotionally flooded. Mm-hmm. So that looks like an oppositional, like rude, obnoxious, hyperactive, distracted kid, ADHD. Mm-hmm. I would tell you that at least 10% of the kids that come into my office are misdiagnosed. It is not ADHD. That is a false perspective. That frame of reference is wrong. And we were saying this before, like Vince, what happens if you give that kid the typical treatment? What is it?
You're going to give him a stimulant.
That kid's, honestly, he's going to pop through the window.
But think about it too. I mean, because, ADHD, we really end up addressing a lot of children, right? Yeah. Because we have parents that bring children in because there's severe academic issues, and what parent doesn't care about their kid's future academically, right? And a lot of these kids are not going to engage in an intake to the fullest, right? They're 7, 8 years old. So you get the reports from mom or dad. So you get what mom or dad experience and you get what they see. And all of that is real and valid. The kid isn't going to be in touch with himself or herself enough to tell you, I think my nervous system's jacked up. I don't, a lot of people have a hard time reporting, which also kind of on the topic of diagnoses, I do want to say that it is difficult sometimes when you're given an intake and it can, an hour or so to get an accurate history and then create that label so that you could proceed with treatment. And sometimes you're not getting the full picture. I feel like it's interactions over time that allow a clinician to actually use the combination of their education and their own observations to conceptualize. And I think that's what leads to a little bit more accuracy in the diagnosis.
Well, and you think about it, right? Your point there was we need to spend a lot of time with somebody and do a deep dive into their background and to their history in order to kind of try and parse out whether it's trauma or ADHD. Guess what? When we run a neuroanalysis, we know instantaneous. We know within a couple of hours.
Oh, yeah.
That report tells us exactly what it is, and we will be able to differentiate. We will have the lens. Mm-hmm. That's the beauty of it.
We will have the lens, and there's no, kind of what you were saying, Vince, we've talked about this on the show, there's no human error. Not like somebody's lying to you, but there's no human error to it of, I don't understand or I don't comprehend what's going on. It's just there. It's in the EEG. We have the data to see that this wave produces this behavior typically.
And think of the pathologizing that goes on, right? Pathologizing means that we are now declaring that there is something defunct and broken in you. So when you declare the diagnosis of ADHD, right? And a lot of times these kids are now marked as the troublemaker. This is now the kid that has no control of himself. These are the kids that feel like they're the meanies. They're the ones that, because they can't control it, they must be evil. Their identity begins to wither. They start thinking of themselves as a bad, broken person. The reality is, like, if anything, a better frame of reference is that poor kid may be a victim. This poor kid may be someone who is tyrannized by that over-aroused central nervous system. And all things being equal, if we can level that out, most of the time, that kid ends up being a sweet, delightful, focused, amazing kid. I see that all the time. I love that.
It's kind of like certain individuals who take a personality test. They take the test. Let's say they're an 8, like an Enneagram 8, or an INTJ, and they look at all these behaviors, right? Like as if you were to look through the DSM and see all of these symptoms. You look through all these behaviors. I do that. I do that. And that's all of a sudden who you are. Now they take it, and if they're in the classroom making trouble, or the teacher's yelling at them again because they can't focus and they're distracting somebody next to them, they're like, there's a part of it that's like, that kid might say, well, I can't help it because I have ADHD.
Yes.
I can't help it because I'm an Enneagram 8. I can't help it because I'm an INTJ.
Kind of an excuse.
It becomes an excuse, and it kind of it gives them an excuse to do these behaviors.
Yeah.
Whereas when you look at the biomarkers, it doesn't quite have the same effect.
Yeah, we don't have to play that game.
We don't have to play that game. And I mean, if somebody wants to, we can say, well, I mean, do you want to live as the distractible person or the troublemaker or whatever? Because now we can train it.
Yeah.
So to keep us moving, because again, we got a lot to cover. Part 2. Now, this is where we're going to get into the topic of what we call doppelgangers, right? We kind of were just talking about it a little bit, but when we use the term doppelgangers, we're referring to a cluster of symptoms that present the reasons behind a cluster of symptoms are very different, but the symptoms look similar.
Yeah.
So the end result is very similar between two very different issues going on.
Yep. So, yeah, exactly. You were right on there. Doppelgangers are essentially symptoms that will emerge that cluster together in a way that result in a diagnosis, but that fundamentally have nothing really to do with the diagnosis. It's not really what that diagnosis is about, which what we just talked about, right? A kid diagnosed with ADHD, all of the doppelgangers were all of those symptoms: impulsivity, hyperactivity. Well, the real diagnosis was overarousal of the central nervous system, which created this, I don't want to use the word facade, but this image of ADHD, but it was a fake. It looked like it, but it isn't. Okay. Because I do argue that the concept of ADHD is pretty dang valid. I get it. I don't like the diagnostic category, but by and large, there is stuff that I would consider kind of more legit ADHD. And I know the one we want to jump into is, I don't even want to get it, bipolar. Okay. Bipolar is one of those diagnoses that I got to tell you, I got an issue with. I really, again, I know that there's I would tell you there's a legit bipolar. And then there are so many doppelganger formats where the EEG clearly shows that a person will dysregulate, mood destabilize, and show significant shifts. And the literature and the diagnostic category does not account for it. And it becomes misleading. And frankly, sometimes the treatments are really bad. I don't want to go too far on that one, but the treatment options out there are wrong.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the title of the podcast, Dysregulated, and you think about the ways that the brain can dysregulate, and you think about something like bipolar and the swings that come with it, right? I've just seen it pop up so much as a diagnosis and then come to work with the person in close proximity. Like I've said in, previous episodes, I do a lot of martial arts work with clients. It's very interactive. Like it's like I pad work as though they were training for a fight, interactive stuff, sparring if they're capable, right? Because I'm trying to create different feedback loops in their ability to regulate, be present, and get something out of the experience, right? And there's times where over experiences and over months of working with someone like that, that diagnosis it's just apparently not fitting, right? And it's like, so where were those points of dysregulation? They truly happened. Well, where were they really coming from, right? If we address that instead of addressing the label, with a lifetime of medication, then we might actually get somewhere with it.
And like going back to what is bipolar, and I'm not going to go into all the specific diagnostic categories. The real straightforward gist of it is a very significant shift in affect, mood, presentation that basically oscillates between extremes. What are we doing? We're going between a highly depressed state to a highly manic state. One where I'm deeply down, no motivation, feeling apathetic. I don't enjoy, I'm kind of numb to pleasure. And on the other side, you can shift over to high energy, sleeplessness, heightened excitability. And there's this incredible swing. Now, I get really frustrated with this one because the field is not recognizing that there are multiple reasons for why a person can manifest these. Some of them are very simple, straightforward EEG combos. It's not just one, but there's combos. So we'll take a look at some of the combos. Another way that we can look at it is there is a central nervous system exhaustion. So some people manifest bipolar. Again, we're going back to that hyperarousal in the central nervous system because of trauma, long-term trauma that's untreated. We'll talk a little bit about that. And then there genuinely are other ones that I would argue are legitimate chemical imbalances. So I'll just kind of sweep it and go, look, if you got a genuine chemical imbalance, obviously you have to treat that with a medication. It's very effective. You don't want to try other stuff and mess around with it. And then we were talking, I said, good Lord, I would tell you in the last 2-3 years, I've had 3 clients that came into me having been prescribed hardcore heavy duty medications after they had a bad marijuana trip. They had a psychotic shift. They went to the ER, and for whatever reason, the attending person diagnosed them bipolar when they knew. I mean, like this to me is where I get really upset because I know people that have been put on things like lithium, and it's shutting down their personality, shutting it down. And the only thing that happened that they really needed was give me 24 hours of observation. Let's let the half-life of all the weed get out of my system and I'll be just fine. And I guess that's one of them where I do get frustrated. That is legit misdiagnosis. I've had 3 different clients that have presented that way. And I'll kind of just get that one out of the way and just say, look, if that's your deal, you had a bad, THC experience and somebody diagnosed you bipolar, do me a favor, get a second opinion and talk to somebody that's actually going to diagnose you correctly. Please. That one frustrates me.
Well, because it's interesting because in a lot of the diagnostic, sections and specific diagnoses, there is a section that, all right, the symptoms that we are considering here are not attributable to the use of a substance, right? And we really do have to consider that. But then again, kind of like I said earlier, it really comes down to the honest disclosures, right? Within that period of an intake, right? When someone's trying to explain to you their life, and if they happen to leave out the fact that they've been taking Adderall for, let's say, 3 months and they quit it 3 days ago because they knew they were coming to you. But now what do we have here? Maybe we've created a chemical imbalance, right? So there's people that might not bring something up that is, contributing to it. It makes it hard for us or hard for a clinician to really, find their mark.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so we've got right ADHD kind of wearing that mask, with trauma really underneath. We've got bipolar. What's our third form?
But, and let me hit then, just to kind of cover that bipolar, right? Because we'll hit autism next, which will be an interesting conversation, because doppelgangers and autism are really kind of a fascinating topic. But like when it goes back to something like bipolar, please, I mean, folks, I want you to realize there are EEG features that on the one hand, you can have a background kind of a biomarker that's hereditary that is associated with low levels of arousal, kind of apathy, low motivation, procrastination, and that's your set point. And it can be combined with an entirely other competing biomarker that is over arousal and impulse control destabilization, emotional destabilization. And so you can have an individual that most of the time is kind of like an Eeyore that every once in a while explodes into Tigger. And it's all in the EEG. You can see both of them, you know what I'm saying? And so all you do on that is you treat those features, and guess what? They moderate. So I see that one a lot in more kind of like extreme kind of situation scenarios and a kind of a very unique presentation in the EEG. The second one that we end up seeing is essentially exhaustion. These are folks where the adrenal system has been on high alert. It's fatigued. You've got limbic overload. These are individuals that likely have had trauma since childhood. They've endured it and experienced it for 30, 40, 50 years. It's never been treated. And it gets to the point where their central nervous system is, picture this, like a cross-country runner, a marathon runner who's literally sprinting for 20 miles, and they're unbelievable in their ability to endure for that amount of time. And then all of a sudden they break down, they fall on the ground in exhaustion, and they're gasping for air, and they're utterly spent. They got nothing left, and they sit there, they breathe and they breathe and they breathe, and they can't move for like several minutes, moments. And then finally they get their breath back, they stand up and they start sprinting again. And that's some people's central nervous system. Well, what's the actual diagnosis? Is it bipolar? Of course not. It may look like a person is manic. Okay, now I'm depressed. But what's happening is their central nervous system is giving out. So you need to treat the central nervous system. And sometimes, like a lot of that's interrupting it with neurofeedback, but then also working with naturopathic or osteopathic doctors to get back health in your adrenal system and hormonal systems. You can do this very naturally and get that treated. These are not the kind of things where we need to be dealing with hardcore meds. You just don't. We can treat these very differently. So there we go. Okay, sorry. I wanted to make sure that we hit that before we jumped into autism.
Vince, did you have something else?
Well, no, I was just over here reflecting because, I had a friend growing up that had such insurmountable fear acutely at one point in time that he ended up going to the mental hospital. He was diagnosed with bipolar, and he was put on lithium. And I just was thinking about how his personality never came back. Like, it was like we hung out every day, and he had an amazing sense of humor, and hanging out with him afterwards. And he's very successful to this day, by the way. But it was just it's such a notable shift. I was thinking about it as you said that,
Yeah.
Well, yeah. So we've got, again, that PTSD, the bipolar. Let's talk about autism. So I want to keep us rolling because, again, this is a huge. Autism wears many masks.
Yeah. Claim to fame. So one of our clients that we treated, young child, is actually the first child in the history of Yale Autism, the Yale Autism Center, to reverse its diagnosis, which is a really cool story. Came in presenting with all kinds of kind of like socializing problems, a lack of effective, communication, speech patterns, not making eye contact, sensory stimming, and all that kind of stuff. So she reached the criteria for an autism spectrum diagnosis, but the problem was all of those were in essence generated not by, and again, people can argue with me over this. My sense is autism essentially is a hypervulnerability and to toxicity in the environment. The brain always, when I treat it, tends to respond and react very much like there's a brain injury. So it feels the same, it responds the same. I think it's rooted in a toxic brain injury. So it's a real thing. It's something that I think is very much in discourse. However, in this young girl's case,
and that's like the basic, like what the DSM like describes.
yes,
That's maybe, I guess maybe not what it
so
describes.
it's what I call legitimate
Yes.
autism. It's real autism.
People who do
Yeah.
have autism. But like with autism, there's a population that, has that sort of exactly
Deep vulnerability in their immune system
vulnerability in the immune
to the
system,
toxicity.
yeah.
We live in a very toxic environment.
What are some masks that it can wear?
So so some of the doppelgangers, with this young lady's presentation, she had she had some delta deficit problems, which meant that she was not really engaging with good kind of somatosensory and higher cortical functioning connections. In other words, she wasn't really feeling her body well. The communication between body stimulus and brain's perception of it wasn't all there. It was whispering, it was very quiet. So she was stimming in order to feel things. Okay. You've also got like a hyperacuity to the sensory overload in that parietal system, which we talked about the last time, right, with PTSD. And so she was hyper attuned to sensory overload in other ways, right? So the body itself wasn't receiving stimulus well, but everything she heard and she saw was that, remember that, blah, what I did the last time, I apologize. So that was her world that way. And there were a couple of other features in there, perfectly emulated the symptoms that would result in the diagnosis of autism. When we did neurofeedback, guess what? They all resolved, and the child was no longer stimming, no longer avoiding eye contact. She also had like some temporal lobe function issues, which accounted for the lack in the delay in her languaging skills. And once we were able to treat those things, all of the symptoms went away. They went back down to the Yale Clinic, and again, they're the best. I mean, like, no, absolutely, Yale is top notch, and they, to their credit, looked at her and like called me up and said, "What did you do?" Like, literally talking to a doctor down there saying, "This is the first time in the history that we have reversed a diagnosis. She doesn't have the criteria." And I said, "Well, let's explain the concept of doppelgangers," and it was a great conversation. But anyway, that again is kind of a great example of a missed diagnosis. It was conceptualized wrong. It was therefore treated wrong. Once you conceptualize it correctly and treat it that way, which, yeah, we'll have to come up with another one. Can I throw this one in? I got to throw one of my favorite stories in real quick.
Please do.
So I had a young lady that came in diagnosed as schizophrenic. She was hallucinating. She would describe how, she's probably in her mid-20s, how there would be like a bloody muzzle, like a wolf mouth, fangs dripping with blood would come out of the wall and try to bite her. She would see it, she'd react. And so she had these visual hallucinations. Obviously, you're going to diagnose her as having something like schizophrenia. We're having hallucinations. And she comes into us. She can't hold a job. She had to, couldn't continue with the master's program, living at home, literally living in terror on an anticonvulsant, on an antipsychotic. My bad. And we actually get her in, we do a neuroanalysis, and we discover indicators that suggested, I can't say it because we're not allowed to diagnose, but we knew they were there. We saw the temporal seizures. So she was actually having seizures in her temporal region. And so, I mean, those are easy for us to find. It's not usual for us to find it, but when we do, we immediately refer them over for a medical review. They can diagnose. We sent her out to a neurologist. The neurologist confirmed the finding, took her off the antipsychotic, put her on an anticonvulsant. All of the psychoses went away. dropped the schizophrenia diagnosis, no more hallucinations. She is now living her life fully and wholly. Again, lenses, guys. This was a doppelganger. Temporal seizures were actually generating this image in her head. And once we found it and treated it correctly, it was taken care of. That was what
I love that story. I feel like I haven't heard that one, and I don't know. I always like with something like this come back to the thought of aim small, miss small, right? Like if our brain is involved in everything that we're dealing with, aiming there is the dead center, right? And it's hard to miss your mark entirely when you're working at data that's coming from the brain. And that's why I feel like this episode, more than anything, should just be eye and ear opening in what you consider, because I know for, before coming here, Jeff and Josh, like my idea of what clients were presenting to me came from the DSM. So I would look at definitions and terms there and pretty much be like, okay, this is what I'm looking for. This is what I'm seeking, right? And, when you're not really considering the biomarker side of things, a lot of times, like you're on the same roads. You're traveling the same roads over and over again.
And Vince, you and I see this all the time. I think even beyond the misdiagnosis doppelganger concept is the concept of overdiagnosis, right? How many times have we seen individuals come in and like, maybe you're listening to this and you can relate, either yourself or somebody else. You've been diagnosed with anxiety, depression, ADHD, neurocognitive problems, possible bipolar, maybe borderline. It drives me crazy too. They throw borderline in just for fun. And they look or maybe it's PTSD. I've got all of these diagnoses. And sometimes I'll just kind of like behind the scenes, I'm like, man, this person just came in with like a Pokemon's worth deck of diagnostic categories. I'm like, hey, I've got a PTSD. You want to trade me for an ADHD and attentive type? And it's ridiculous. And they come in, if you have 7 diagnoses, how do you treat that? And then the beauty of it is we do the neuroanalysis and we go, oh, you have 5 biomarkers. We look at those 5 biomarkers. They intersect perfectly to generate symptoms that can fall into any of those categories. And not any one of those categories fulfills really explains it well. But once we look at the neuroanalysis, now, boom, it makes sense. And you treat it, and guess what? Now we've just knocked out 7 diagnoses.
That's it. It's the direct correlation between what is seen and where action will lie. That's the beauty of the QEEG. From my perspective, it's something that I really enjoy that element of it, where it's like, okay, yeah, if you've got 7 diagnoses and each of them come with 7 criteria that you would have to hit, that's a lot of stuff to consider. But then you do a QEEG, you've got 5 biomarkers, treat the biomarkers, and you watch the symptoms disappear that would justify the diagnosis, which would be the label, right? Because we were talking about excuses earlier. Sometimes a diagnosis can be a person's formed template of how they act, right? I've had people try to convince me that they have a diagnosis that doesn't fit per the DSM. I've had people come in and say and explain diagnoses and try and get them. It's much easier to look at the actual origin of all of it,
So here, ready? I got a good play on words here. So not only do we know that misdiagnosis can be recalibrated as a missed diagnosis, but when we correctly diagnose, you can say bye-bye and miss your diagnosis.
Ooh.
Sorry, that was really poor.
It wasn't. That was not.
The only thing that hurts in my office is my sense of humor.
That was witty.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, I put that. You know what? A client and I will develop that into a song. It'll be good.
I love it.
Well, yeah. Well, do you guys have any closing thoughts? I think we nailed it. I think actually, the one other one that I love bringing up is OCD. A lot of times, this is the one I would love to chat about. OCD has one biomarker. It has one. Like, right, we're talking about ADHD. We got 15 different ones. Anxiety has 10 or more. Like, all of these, all of these things can present differently. OCD is really weird because it's just got one. It's this rhythmic theta in the anterior cingula, like right basically on the top of your head. And what it does is it's a pulse of electricity that tells somebody, it's like an urge, like, hey, do it. do it, do it, do it. So you think like the classic germaphobe, wash your hands, wash your hands, wash your hands.
Yep.
Would you venture to guess what a cause for a child who is incredibly oppositional could be? No, 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 I won't do it. No, I won't do it. No, I won't do it. You know, like, could you venture to guess some other ways in which that could be creatively used by the brain to basically just urges, right?
Yeah. Yeah. That's the beauty of what you just raised, Josh. We're gonna have to do an entire episode on OCD because we've done a really deep dive into this. Really interesting things to say about it. Here's something that almost nobody knows and is crucial in terms of understanding how to treat stuff. Not only like what you said, is it true that everybody diagnosed with OCD has this one biomarker? Okay. We can talk more about what that means in upcoming episodes, but we now know that that one biomarker is always present in children diagnosed with oppositionality. So what we know is oppositional defiant disorder is a misdiagnosis. It ought, based upon the data, I am suggesting that oppositional defiant disorder is not its own category. It is a subcategory of OCD. It is a compulsive inability to be compliant. Ooh, let's sit on that one a little bit.
That's going to be
that's a fun one. And OCD, for those of you struggling with it, oh man, there's some good options for OCD and even better ones that I can talk about in terms of research down the line. We might be able to find somebody maybe that can speak to the research. Could be kind of cool.
Yeah. But yeah, any closing thoughts from you guys? I just want to throw that one in there real quick because that's one of my favorite examples.
Yeah. Our goal is to make sure that you will one of these days miss your diagnosis, say bye-bye. That's my goal.
I love it. I can't follow that other than to say it's been an awesome first season, and I've loved being a part of it. So let's go.
This has been a blessing. Thank you guys all for listening, especially people who've been around from the beginning. If you have listened to all of our episodes, y'all are fantastic. Thank you so much. Reminder that the book has launched. This is a few weeks ago, maybe a couple months ago.
It's been out there for a bit.
It's been out there for a while. I will put the link in the description below. But if you're looking to launch your career in neurofeedback, I know a guy and he wrote a great book about it. So, hey, as you know, as we say every episode, if you learned something, if you liked what you heard, would you give us a thumbs up? Would you like it? Would you share? Would you subscribe? Again, follow us on social media. All of those things. They help
spread the love.
Yeah, spread the love. Send it to your family, your friends, your coworkers, whatever. We just want our goal here at the Nervation Center and on the Dysregulated podcast is not even necessarily to sell people things. Like that's not really our heart behind this. We want to bring hope and healing and wholeness to the people who don't have those things. Yeah. We want to bring hope to the people who are hopeless, and those are oftentimes our favorite people to work with. Are the people who they feel like they've tried everything and nothing works. So this is really, if you know somebody who's like that, send them our link. Send them to the Nervation Center. We love those cases, not because this is a business, sure, but more so this business has a mission, and it's to restore the lives of people who, quite frankly, their lives have been robbed in a lot of cases. So that was a little improv there, but seriously, from the bottom of all of our hearts here at the Nervation Center and Dysregulated, thank you guys so much for listening to our first season of Dysregulated. We will be back very soon with even more awesome content. If you guys have any recommendations on things we should cover in these next seasons, let us know. We would love to hear from you. But until season 2, we will say farewell